So coming back, uh, we've started looking at the Gospel of John to look into see, what is so unique and different about this gospel versus the other ones that we've encountered. Um, we kind of began to look at that. We looked at some of that symbolic language, especially looking at it through the prologue of John. Now we dive into most of the text. As we talked about session, um, we saw that there are two books, two books that divide the Gospel of John. There's the book of signs and the book of glory. So I want to take this section to talk about the book of signs. What is a sign? What is all of this? What does it mean? What does it signify? And to look into some examples, to look into some of these texts and to see what they say. So this is another point of difference between the synoptics and John. So in the synoptic gospels, we talked about the miracles. Remember that we talked about all these various works that Jesus did, the nature miracles, the healing miracles, and kind of the subdivisions and all of that. Excuse me for a second. Sorry, still a little bit stuffed up. So there are kind of two generic Greek words that the synoptics use to talk about to specify what is happening. There's not something that can necessarily translate to miracle. Miracles really comes from Latin, miraculum. The two words that they use are either dunamis or semeion. Dunamis means kind of power, something that is done with power, a deed of power. Then there's semeion, which often gets translated as a sign. So the synoptics go interchange with these two words. Say it's a dunamis or it's a semeion. But John will specifically use here semeion. He will talk about this sign, this semeion. So, but it is this miracles versus signs that is another major point of difference between these two different gospel accounts. So we have here looking at miracles in the synoptic gospels versus signs in the Gospel of John. So synoptics here, kind of that middle column, John in the room. Number and type. So first and foremost, the synoptics have dozens of these, and they can be categorized. We did that already. We did the nature miracles, the bread and multiplication of loaves, the calming of winds, the healing miracles, part of them exorcisms, or the greatest sign, resurrection miracles, restoration miracles. So there are dozens. There are so many. But John has only a few specific individual events. Whereas the synoptics may have even general summaries. They may say, well, they're just so overwhelmed. They're just like, well, Jesus did this and that and this and that. John has a few specific events that he tells us about. In fact, the traditional count is 7, and we'll talk about them later in this class. No real exorcism. They're kind of split between nature and healing, and one of them, of course, is raising of the dead. What they do for the narrative, so the character of the narratives. The synoptics, as it were, they emphasize, they're emphatic, they emphasize the extraordinary actions or extraordinary elements of what Jesus is doing, of what Jesus is. Whereas John's narrative kind of downplays them. John's focus is not on the miraculous, almost kind of like, oh yeah, it happened, but well, whatever. But often each of these signs is followed by a dialogue of controversy. That some conflict occurs more often than not because of these miracles. What these actions do, so the function of these actions of Jesus. In the Synoptics, they are powerful deeds. They relate to the kingdom of God. Jesus' main message in the Synoptics is, kind of the proclamation of the kingdom. Repent and believe, for the kingdom of God is at hand. So showing his authority, his kingship. If it's a kingdom, there's a king. So Jesus is the king. It's good to be the king. So showing his authority, and especially since we see all those exorcism miracles, especially the power of Jesus over Satan, over the one who claims to have authority and dominion over all of these things. Whereas John, they are more symbolic actions. They're not actions. They're not meant to be taken just in and of themselves. But they point to, they direct our attention towards something else. They draw our attention to who and what Jesus is, of him being the Word, of him being the Son of the Father, of him drawing us to himself. Finally, the role that they have. What do these things, these miracles and these signs, what do they do? In the Synoptics, more often than not, one already believes in Jesus, and then Jesus does it. Many of them ask. We saw that the centurion who asked Jesus to heal one of his servants, his slaves. Many of them are like that they already believe in Jesus, so they have no issue asking, petitioning Jesus to do this, and so Jesus does it. You could say it's more to increase the faith, the belief of those around them. Where in John, it's kind of reversed. The sign is performed or given. The sign is put up so that people believe because of what they've seen. To believe in this Jesus because he has done this, this immense, great task. Believe and come into being, so that they may have what Jesus wants them to have, ultimately, eternal life. So that's how we can begin to see the function, the different functions that these miracles, these signs do, or perform, or have in the different narratives between John and between the Synoptics. Now, there are traditionally said to be in the interpretation or commentating on the Gospel of John, there are said to be 7, sometimes even 8 signs. And some of them are clearly identified by John. So take a second to look over the list. Excuse me. So the first sign, and John himself says this, the first of the signs that Jesus does is in the second chapter, verses 1 through 11, the wedding feast of Cana. And simply put, this is a nature miracle. So Jesus transforms water into wine. The second sign, and again, identified by John as the second sign, is this healing miracle. The son of an official who is near death. He's not dead, but is dying. Near the town of Capernaum, or Capharnaum, in chapter 4. There is then the third sign is number 3 here, the healing of a sick man in Jerusalem. The pool of Bethesda or Bethsaida is in Jerusalem. It's even in the temple, and so that happens there. The feeding of 5,000 in chapter 6, the beginning of chapter 6. John doesn't number it. He doesn't say this is the fourth sign, but he uses that word, semeion. When the people saw this sign, this semeion, they began to believe, or they began to be interested. Immediately after that, one more perhaps for his disciples than the general crowd, a walking on water. That again, a nature miracle. The sixth one is the healing of the man born blind in chapter 9. This account stretches on various dialogues and all that, and John puts in the lips of Jesus's opponents, some of the chief priests and religious authorities. How can this one sinner do such signs, such semeion? How is that possible? How can this be done? The last kind of, as it were, the last kind of sign in the book of signs, that's why I want to specify it that way, is the raising of the friend of Jesus, Lazarus, from the dead. This is almost the entire chapter of chapter 11. They heard he had done this sign, so they say, he's done this. One could argue, perhaps the resurrection as a sign. Sometimes it's kind of thrown in there. First of all, you remember the use of the number 7, a very biblical number. 8 becomes a very New Testament number because Jesus rises on the first day, which is also could be said to be the 8th day. So the resurrection appearance can said to be the same thing. It could be a sign as well. But all of these pale in comparison to the ultimate sign. And what is that ultimate sign? That is the cross. And it is through it is as Jesus is transitioning from the book of signs into the book of glory. So in chapter 12, verse 32, he talking about what will come. And he says, when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw everyone to myself. That's the point of a sign. The sign is to direct our attention towards something. It is to communicate something in a way that words maybe fail to do or words can't do in that moment, in that situation. What's a stop sign communicate? It communicates that we need to stop at this point, to take a break, to, check the scene to make sure, we don't, drive through and cause an accident. So Uh, that's what these signs are meant to point towards the glory that is being revealed of Jesus, uh, and to draw us to his attention. So let's begin diving in to this. We will go first. We'll look first at the wedding feast of Cana, or the marriage of Cana, as a scene here. So, looking at our text, setting up. This is Jesus. Jesus has gathered many of his disciples together. They are, they're beginning to be assembled together. The apostles, all that, slightly different, or maybe, as I said before, complementary. We don't really hear much about how they're brought together in the synoptics. So John filling us in, and John should be very familiar with that because he did it. He was one of them. So Jesus starting out in his homeland, Galilee, going to a village in Cana. It's unclear whose marriage it is, whether a relative, a friend. It could be just someone there, since it's such a tight-knit community, everybody may have been invited. One thing to understand about wedding feasts, especially Jewish wedding feasts in this time, this was not, a one-night affair. Most of us here now, we have a wedding in the afternoon, and then we go and we have dinner, and then we have drinks, and we have dancing, and there's, all the various classics, Sweet Caroline or YMCA or the chicken dance or whatever it is. And then everybody goes home late at night, whether in some state of inebriation or soberness, to various levels, usually. A wedding feast here was 7 to 8 days of feasting and rejoicing. Maybe not the full day. I don't want to make it sound like just like almost like orgiastic. No. It was such a momentous occasion that it was greatly celebrated. So to be married was a serious thing. So it was a lot of preparation to go into it, to get everything ready. So this wedding feast happens. John points to us first. He says the mother of Jesus was there. So she's there first. But then Jesus is invited, and Jesus brings along his new buddies, his disciples. The wine fails. So they've run out of wine. Not a good sign for a wedding feast if there's no more wine. Nobody's going to stay. Nobody's going to have fun. And we'll talk about whether it's wine or grape juice in a second. So the mother of Jesus turns to Jesus and she makes a statement. It seems they have no wine. Very, very factual. So Jesus' response is interesting. He turns to her and he says, "Woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not yet come." A second here. Erase some things here. The hour, it has a very symbolic value in John's gospel. Hour, is the time. Obviously, the time of Jesus's full glory, full revelation of glory. So, because we'll hear Jesus use this phrase, "My hour has come." We'll hear that in the book of glory. So in chapter 17 or 18, he will say, "My hour has come at last. It's now here." um, to enter into it. Um, so he turned. But to hear this rather sharp phrase, first of all, he addresses her woman. We might take that as being very disrespectful. I mean, like, why wouldn't you call her mother, ma? Call her by her name. Why do you call her woman? The um, the early church fathers, many of the interpreters since then, have seen in this, not a sign of disrespect, like to put her in her place, like, how dare you, talk to me. But as hearkening back to the original woman, Paul in his letters will talk about Jesus as being the new Adam, or the new man, in comparison with the old man, which is Adam, the first man. It's things like, since by the old man sin entered the world, by the new man grace comes in. So this is not a sign of disrespect of Jesus, kind of degrading her, but as it were, kind of hinting at what's to happen, and kind of a Semitic way of saying it, as it were. It's like, if you do this, this is kind of what Jesus is kind of saying this, my hour has not yet come. So, if you do this, if you want me to do this, what this is going to involve for me, for Jesus, and for you, Mary, mother, is going to be tremendous. That it's going to lead to my suffering and to my resurrection, but to my suffering. Do you, are you going to join me in that? Are you going to accept that? Since this is the first sign. Remember that this is the first sign in John. So Jesus is not widely known at this point. He is known. I mean, he draws the disciples to himself, so he's known by some, but he's not such a popular figure, and he's not very loved nor very hated, which is what leads to his execution. Is the hatred against him. So, once he does this, this sign, as we said, is meant to lead to belief. So it's meant to transform those who see it, so that they believe in him and they follow him. And sometimes it will have the opposite effect. People will hate him so much that they will try to destroy him. But he's kind of asking, are you willing to go along with that? With all that entails, my leaving you, preaching, teaching, my, suffering, my death, and my resurrection. What will lead to my hour? Her next response, which is the last words we have of the mother of Jesus. Her last words right here, verse 5. His mother said to the servants, a very beautiful phrase, do whatever he tells you. First of all, it's a very maternal phrase, isn't it? Just, somebody says, oh yeah, do what, just do whatever he tells you. He'll do it. But it is also an acceptance of Jesus's task, of Jesus's mission. It is also her willingness to join in with that, to accept that, as any disciple is supposed to do that, so that remember what we saw in the other, part of Jesus' teaching is to accept the cross. So this is Mary showing her acceptance of her cross in union with Jesus, which in a certain way, is Jesus' cross, since she will be there with him for that, as we'll see later on. So this won't be the last time we see anything of the mother of Jesus in John's gospel. We'll see her at the cross even. We'll look at that when we get later there. So the mother says, do whatever he tells you. So, Mary accepts, so Jesus will do it. John writes and tells us there are 6 stone jars standing there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. So these are immense containers. As we talked about perhaps a little bit, the Jewish laws, part of it, are very purification minded. A lot of washing of hands, washing of pots, washing of things to keep things clean, ritualistically clean, not just oh, it's dirty, but ritualistically clean as well. So Jesus tells them to fill those jars, fill those 6 jars, fill them up all the way, which they do here. See verse 7 here. And then he says, draw some out and take it to the steward. The steward is the one who is kind of in charge of distributing the goods. Sometimes it's translated as the head waiter, but steward is a good word for it as well. So in right here in verse 9, we hear what happens. We already kind of hinted at what it is. When the steward of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from. The servants don't tell him. The servants drew the water, knew it, but the servant doesn't. He's just oh, we have no wine. Oh, we've just found some. The servants go, oh, we found some. Oh, it's great. And so he's tasting it to check, because you don't want it to be bad, or to poison someone. That'd be terrible if at a wedding feast someone dies. So the servant tastes it, and it's so different. The steward calls the bridegroom, the one who's kind of responsible. He says, every man, serves the good wine first, and when men have drunk freely, then the poor wine. By the way, that's how we know it's wine. And sometimes there are some Christians who will try to interpret this as grape juice or whatnot. Oh, oh, alcohol is evil, whatnot. No. Why? Because this is a classic technique of those who drink. You drink the nice stuff first when you still have taste and you still appreciate it. But when you're buzzed and when you're or when you're really far gone, you don't care what you're drinking. You just want to keep drinking. So you serve the best first, so that people appreciate it, they remember it, they recall it. But if they're farther along, then you just serve whatever, just because they don't care at that point. Yes, it's wine. Yes, people can and probably did even get drunk on it. But he says, normally you have the good wine first, then the poor. You serve the best, and then. But you, servant talking to the bridegroom, you have kept the good wine until now. He's kind of just mocking him. What are you doing? What are you doing wasting all of this? So John caps it. And he says, this, the first of Jesus's signs. This, the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee. And, pointing ahead, what's the sign doing? And manifested his glory, made present, made visible, made real his glory. And the result, his disciples believed in him. That sign leads to faith. Whereas faith, there's belief in Jesus leads to miracles in the synoptics. It's the reverse. Faith comes because of the sign. The sign first, then faith. It is often seen as interpreted in the kind of as various senses of Scripture. One way it's interpreted is the transition from the old Jewish law, which was, which did the task, as it were. The water of the law is transformed by Jesus into the wine of grace. We saw that looking up at the prologue gospel, the prologue of this gospel. While the law came through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus. The law, as it were, is just kind of bland. It's there. It does the task, or it barely does the task. Would we want to drink water at a wedding feast? Most likely not. But it's what's the phrase? But it's not. But the wine is more enjoyable, more refreshing, more even enriching. Water keeps us just hydrated, whereas wine is pleasurable to the taste, to the stomach, even to the mind, if one enjoys it in moderation, even maybe in immoderation. So, that Jesus, in Jesus, through Jesus, from Jesus, we go from the kind of poor, the lesser, to the greater, which is, his grace and his truth, both together. Not one without the other. It's because of that. So a good question here. Talking about, when Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come," did he say this as he hasn't started his main ministry yet? It's kind of his ministry has kind of started, because he's gathering disciples. But this is really kind of the beginning. This is the first of his signs that he does. Is kind of an inauguration of his ministry, as it were. Not as strong of one as perhaps the baptism and the temptation are. And remember also, we should read this kind of in as a complementing the synoptics. So what you could see this as, John goes, all right, that Jesus was baptized. That Jesus was tempted. Because this comes after Jesus interacts with John even. So John, with John the Baptist. So John the Apostle, John the Gospel writer, is going, all right, this then happened after that. This was the first of the signs. Whether in a real sense, chronological sense, or just in a narrative sense. This is not another question is, is this sign or miracle of Jesus the one and only miracle where Jesus asked to do something? No. I mean, Jesus is asked quite a bit in this gospel, just as he was asked in the synoptics. This isn't like Jesus just comes up and is like, "Oh, you're dead. Here, rose up. You're alive now. Oh, you're No, people do indeed ask Jesus. Just like in here, just like in this account we just read, people do ask and want Jesus to heal. We one thing maybe not caught in necessarily reading too deeply in these accounts is Jesus is flooded with people near the end of his ministry. I mean, so much so people are just clamoring to touch him, to reach him. Kind of like we might try to reach and get our cell phones, selfie. They want to hold him, to grasp, and just be able to say, I touched this Jesus of Nazareth. I touched him. So no, there are plenty of people who asked and wanted Jesus to do all of this. The other one
The other sign I would like to look into, um, transitioning from this first sign, to look at one of the latter signs. This is the healing of the blind man. Now, just to set this up, this is kind of Jesus's second visit to Jerusalem. So he's in the temple precinct. We hear this, we see in chapter 8 before him, and we'll see some of this looking next time at some of the sayings of Jesus. He says, before Abraham was, I am. They took up stones to throw at Jesus, but Jesus hid himself, went out of the temple. So Jesus leaves the temple precinct. He sees a man who is blind from birth. And a great theological reflection is given here in these first few lines. And this is going along some of the interpretations of the scholars. The disciples asked, they said, who sinned? So remember, blindness is kind of seen as a defect of the human person, which it is, because one lacks the faculty of seeing, of perceiving things through the eyes. So it is a defect, but that was often seen as being caused by sin. Someone sinned, and therefore God, as it were, kind of, the interpretation goes, God punished this man that he was born blind. So the disciples in that tradition, they refer to Jesus by that revered term of rabbi, which is Jewish for teacher or master. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So kind of they're wanting to say, so where can we place the blame for this man? Was it because of a sin that he would commit that he was born blind? Or was it because his parents did something wrong, and therefore, as punishment to the parents, or to himself, that sin carrying down upon him, the man was born blind? Jesus' answer is insignificant. He says, it was not that this man sinned or that his parents sinned, but that the works of God might be made manifest in him. This defect is not a result of sin. It is so that the works of God can be manifested, which, of course, on our knowledge of the rest of the story, we'll see Jesus healing the man. Jesus goes, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night comes when no one can work. He keeps going on like this. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So Jesus acts in a somewhat natural manner. We think Jesus is going to wipe his hands over his eyes and say, "You healed. Go forth. You healed." But he's very physical here. He spits on the ground, and he forms some clay, some dry dirt, and he puts the clay on the man's eyes. Kind of covers them up, and he says, go and wash in this pool, and the pool is called Siloam, which means it's a Hebrew word. It means to be sent. So the man did that. He went to the pool, got to the pool somehow. He washed the clay out of his eyes, and he could see. So he's beginning to rejoice, and the people around him, they notice, and they're kind of wondering, wait, like, don't I know you? Like, weren't you a blind beggar? Didn't you used to, be unable to see? Some say yes, some say no. He just like him. He offers the truth. He says, I am the man. I'm him. I'm who you knew, but I can see now. They want to know, how are your eyes open? How is this possible? He said, the man called Jesus did all this. He made clay, he anointed my eyes. I went and washed and received my sight. So we see then So that's the actual miracle. It's interesting what happens afterwards. A lot of this, um, a lot of going through and seeing the antagonism of the Pharisees increasing because of this. So, they bring this man to the Pharisees, um, and why? Not because necessarily the healing itself is wrong, because it was a Sabbath day. Remember what we said about the Sabbath. One is supposed to avoid work. Sorry. No, give me a second here. Of course, I hit the wrong button. One is supposed to avoid any and all work on the Sabbath. Well, a healing, obviously, is a work. So the Pharisees are already mad at Jesus. And they're like, how could this man do this? He's supposed to know the law, and yet he's healing on the Sabbath. So they're trying to get to the bottom. They're doing an investigation, doing the facts. They ask us, but they begin to express their internal thoughts. Miracles are supposed to only be done by those who are associated with God, because God is in true control. But some of the Pharisees say, this man, this Jesus, he's not from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. But there's division sowing within themselves. Others say, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs, such semeion? They question the formerly blind man. And he says about Jesus, he says, he is a prophet. He is one who comes from God in some way. Now, they want to, the Pharisees, and John calls them Jews here, those who are in all this, they don't want to believe it. So they want to say, maybe he's just making it up. So they track down, they go so far as to track down this man's parents. They say, go find your parents and bring them here, who have probably not encountered him yet as being healed. So, they track him down. They drag these two probably older people in front of these officials, who have some power, some authority. And, they ask, is this your son? Was he really blind? How can he see? And they offered, a testimony starting 20 here, we know that this is our son. We know he was born blind. How he now sees, we don't know. We don't know who opened his eyes. Ask him. They kind of defer. It's like, he's old enough. He's an adult. He can speak for himself. Excuse me. Excuse me again. They kind of defer. They just say, yes, he's our son. Yes, he was born blind. We know that. We don't know how he can see now, and who did it. He's the only one who knows. It's interesting. John writes, his parents said this because they feared the Jews, these leaders, for they had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, the anointed one, he was to be put out of the synagogue, out of the assembly of the people. So, so they bring in the formerly blind man again, and say, and they push him on this. They don't question. They say, give God the praise. It's only because of God that this happens, because we who are the authorities, we know that this man is a sinner. And the man has a rather interesting insight. He says, whether he's a sinner, whether he goes against God, I don't know. One thing I know was I was blind, and now I'm not. I could not see. Now I can. What did he do you? How did he do it? They keep asking again. He says, I keep telling you, I've told you already. You're not, do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? This man, he's beginning to express signs of belief, that he believes that this is There's something about this Jesus. He calls him a prophet right now, which is not the fullness of the truth, but is getting there. But the Pharisees, the Jews, reviled that man, saying, you are his disciple. We're from Moses. We will know that God has spoken to Moses because we have all these centuries to know that. But as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. But then this man has this very insightful revelation. He says, "This is a marvel. You do not know where he comes from, where Jesus comes from, and yet he opened my eyes." We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. Pretty much true. Look through the Old Testament. You don't really hear of that. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So this man is beginning to say, he comes from God in some way. He opened my eyes. What better sign could you have? That this wonderful work. If he's a sinner, he can't do that. Why? Because God doesn't listen to sinners, right? God doesn't listen to those who are separated from him. A sinner is separated from God. But they still in their rigid mindset of what they interpret the scriptures to be. Say, you were born in sin, and how dare you teach us, the pure, right? They throw him out of there. They're done with him. So Jesus goes back to the man. He hears that he's thrown out, he's cast out, and he says, and he answers, do you believe in the Son of Man? You believe in the one who has truly come from man among you. And the formerly blind man goes, who is he? Who is he that I may believe in him? Jesus says, in this kind of roundabout, almost kind of Semitic or Aramaic way, you've seen him, and it is he who speaks to you. It's me. Jesus says. And he said, Lord, he gives him that divine title. Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. He gave him, he gave him that which is only owed to God. Remember, worship is only given to a deity. You don't worship anything less than a God as God. So, and Jesus seems to say about how he's turning everything around. Those who do not see may see. So those who haven't seen, perhaps, the mercy, the grace, the truth that they can see, and those who see, who remain fixed on these other things, become blind. And there are some Pharisees who hear him and they're near to him. Are we also blind? Are we counted? He says, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But you say that you see, so your guilt remains. So really in this highlighting not just the sign itself, that's the sign. The work that comes out of the sign is what must be understood and appreciated. It's not just merely that the man's eyes were healed. It's that his soul is opened up to see the one who can make this happen. That he was able to see and behold Jesus as the one who can make this happen, and in that being in some way coming from God, whether to say he's truly the Word or the Son. He may not be saying that as much, but he recognizes in him something deeper. His eyes are opening up more to see that. And by the end, by the time he actually encounters this Jesus, to recognize him as the Son of Man, he worships him. He worships him as God, as divine. Whereas we're seeing the blindness of the Pharisees, from the kind of cataracts that are going in, closing in to full blindness. That because they remain focused on the law. Again, that division, the law which is not enough, which is insufficient in and of itself, but they hold it up as that, to say this is all that you need, that's necessary. That's it. All of this right here. Do that, and you're good with God. And yet that's not true. That's the case. Why does Jesus have to come? It is Jesus who shows us the insufficiency of the law in and of itself. Hence, the transition from the ways of the old to the new way, from the Old Testament, the old law and all that, though it has some value in it, don't completely throw it out. From the old to the new. To the new, relying not on words, but the word. Not laws, but the lawgiver. The one who, not from that which seems impossible to fulfill for humanity, to the one who has fulfilled it in every way. So that's what these signs are in John, are helping us. They're meant to foster faith within us, to believe in this one, not to have faith and then to ask, but to believe in who and what he is at his inner being that word, being the one who has done all of this and will still do further for us. So this is the power of the signs within John's gospel. Helping to, though they help us be open to Jesus, they can also be the means whereby some people's eyes are blinded. We'll see how deep that blindness goes in the as we continue reading through John. So, questions, thoughts, comments on any of that in the here and now?
I just wanted to clarify. I know this probably won't be like a straight answer, but
Mhm.
at the wedding of Cana, that discourse between Jesus and Mary, is that kind of like him? Hold on, I wrote down this question. Is that like almost him asking if he can begin his public mission?
Um, I don't want to say necessarily like asking her for permission, like asking
Right.
for her consent. I guess is the way I would phrase that the tradition phrases it. It's not. I mean, yeah, it's not. It's not like oh mom, can I go do miracles, suffer and die. It's more like are you willing? This is what's going to happen. Are you ready for that to happen? More like asking her permission to to continue. Like are you really ready for me to do all of this? Um, so and her answer, of course, is the affirmative. She said, yeah, do whatever he tells you, which is, of course, the greatest advice anyone could tell you. Do whatever Jesus tells you. No, very good question. Other thoughts, um, other thing? Anybody else? No, very good. For next week, for the virtual session, read up on the John chapter 6. We will look into the I am sayings of Jesus, and also read the back half of John chapter 13 through 21. We will not only do the bread of life, we will also do um, the last days. The Last Supper, the betrayal, the passion, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus, as seen by John. That's the important distinguisher to see. This is how John is showing it. The extra or additional details that John gives us compared to the synoptics. So we will look into that. Get the reading journal done for today, number 4. Start working on number 5. Sign up for your epistle. Do the link that is in week 11 overview page. There's a link there. I will also post the link in an announcement that when everything's ready, do the participation quiz like normal. So have all of that done, start working on all of that or finish it all up. If you need help or having issues, especially with the epistle paper, please feel free to contact me, email, in person, or whenever. Any of those methods will work. So I will review week 9 and week 10 quizzes. So look at be sure that you've gotten them in. If nothing else, then we'll stop from there, and we'll see you all virtually, at least, if not in person, next week. So God bless and have a good night.